Hello and welcome to another one of these ADD videos. Today we're going to be discussing solving basic trig equations. What happens when you see an equation in this form here, sine of theta equals 1/2? What is that asking you? Well, that's asking you what theta values, what angles have a sine of 1/2. How do you go about solving those equations? Well, the first step is to get any numerical values that are attached to the trigonometric function on the other side. So for instance, if this was, 3 plus, or actually 3 minus 6 sine theta, you'd have to subtract the 3 over, divide both sides by 6. I'll show you an example of that in the example videos. Okay, so after you do that, you're going to take the arc sine of both sides, or the sine inverse, however you want to write it down. And what that's asking is you're saying, okay, what angles indeed have the sine of 1/2? In this case, to get the reference angle, you ask yourself what reference angle has a sine of 1/2. If you do your chart or whatever you got to do that, a calculator, you'll find out that it's 30 degrees. And once you know it's 30 degrees, you got to figure out what quadrant you're in. Well, if you remember this acronym all students take calculus, sine is positive 1/2 here in the first quadrant and in the second quadrant. Okay, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch the trig functions concept video. And if you're restricted to 2 pi, you just use your little rules. For the first quadrant, it's always pi on top with 6 in the denominator if it's a 30-degree reference angle. And in the second quadrant, it's 1 less than the denominator, so 5 pi over 6. Okay. If you were doing in degrees, it'd be 30 degrees and 150 for that example. Now, if you're not restricted to 0 and 2 pi like we were in the other one, you'd have to add, in this case, a 2n pi, where n is an element of the integers. If you remember, the integers are the positive and negative whole numbers. So if it's tangent or cotangent, the 2 pi is for these four: sine, cosine, cosecant, secant, the reciprocals. If it's tangent, cotangent, it's n pi, because the period for n is, for tangent and cotangent is n, and the period, the time it takes for one cycle to repeat, is going to be 2 pi. So we encounter these answers every 2 pi that the function occurs. If you remember sine and cosine, the graphs basically oscillate between 1 and -1. So there will be many regions in which we will get this 1/2 value for the sine function every time we hit that graph. There was one, there's another one. Okay, so it occurs all these times, so we have to account for it if it's not restricted by doing that 2n pi thing, or n pi depending on the function. Alright, so I hope I've cleared things up a little bit. The best way to learn these is to practice. We're going to go through these example videos here. If you watch the video, or the example video, so practice, practice, practice. Thank you and have a nice day.